Her son stirred the tea, smiled, said, "Just helping, Mom." Hours later, Grace collapsed, heart racing, thoughts fogged, trust poisoned. She'd raised him on skipped meals and folded prayers. Now he was drugging her into silence. But this mother didn't forget. She recorded everything, and when she rose, she didn't just fight back. She documented her revenge. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Portland, Oregon, February, gray skies bleeding light through thin clouds. The fluorescent lights in the neurologist's waiting room hummed with clinical detachment. Grace Hollander sat on the edge of a vinyl chair that smelled faintly of antiseptic and age. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. She wore her best wool coat and lipstick 2 shades brighter than she preferred, a detail Daniel had insisted on. "So you don't look too pale, Mom." Daniel stood at the check-in desk, voice calm and practiced. "She's been forgetting things. Not just names or where she puts things, full conversations. She asked me last week if my father was still alive. He's been gone 30 years. That part was true. But the rest? A well-rehearsed fabrication. Grace tilted her head slightly, just enough to watch him. He wasn't looking back. He was charming the receptionist now, hand on the counter, polished in his pressed slacks and concerned son demeanor. When he turned around, his smile dropped. Back to business. He offered her a hand, like a caregiver rather than a child. "Come on, Mom, they're ready." She let him lead her into the exam room. Let him place his hand gently on her elbow, like she might trip without it. The neurologist, Dr. Linden, was young, kind eyes, stiff posture. He greeted her warmly, made a note on his tablet before speaking. "Grace, I'm just going to ask a few simple questions today, all right?" Grace smiled sweetly. "Of course, dear. Just don't ask me what I had for breakfast. I couldn't even tell you if I had breakfast." Daniel chuckled, a little too loud. "See, this is what I've been trying to explain. She's been saying things like that for months." Grace offered a faint giggle. "I'm just old. Aren't we all a little scrambled by now?" Dr. Linden glanced at her, then Daniel. "Well, age-related memory loss is normal, but we want to rule out anything more advanced." Daniel jumped in. "There was an incident at the store last month. She forgot how to use the credit card machine, froze up, told the cashier her PIN was February." Grace blinked slowly. "That happened?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, Mom, you cried afterward, in the parking lot." Grace narrowed her eyes just a touch. He'd planted that. He'd designed that, offered to handle the groceries, then made her enter the card herself, knowing they'd recently changed the system. The look on his face when she stumbled, it had been more than concern. It had been relief. Grace widened her eyes just enough to mimic uncertainty. "Oh, yes, that was upsetting." Dr. Linden made another note. The questions started. "What year is it? Who's the president? Count backward from 100 by sevens. Name 3 animals and recall them later." She missed 2. On purpose, she hesitated at world events, then laughed and said, "I haven't read the paper in a while. Do people still read the paper?" Daniel gave a sad smile. Grace watched him as he watched the doctor. He was steering the room. A flashback rose in her mind. Quiet and cold. Daniel, age 13, slamming a door so hard it cracked the drywall. Her knuckles raw from cleaning offices that day. Her voice calm but tired as she told him there was no money for new sneakers. He'd screamed that she was useless, that if Dad were alive, they'd be rich. She'd gone to her room, locked the door, and cried into the quilt she'd sewn during chemo. Back in the exam room, Dr. Linden looked up. "I'd like to run a few more tests, but preliminarily, there are some signs here. Mild cognitive impairment, possibly early-onset dementia." Daniel inhaled slowly, as if absorbing a blow. "Thank you for being honest. I just want what's best for her." Grace tilted her head. "Will I need to be put in a home?" she asked softly, voice wobbling at the edges. Daniel reached for her hand too quickly. "Not if I can help it, Mom," she smiled. She didn't squeeze back. Later, as she buckled herself into Daniel's car, she stared out the window at the passing streets of her own neighborhood, now cast in a new shadow. He thought she was forgetting. He had no idea she was beginning to remember everything. Portland, Oregon, March, drizzle, the kind that doesn't fall, it hangs, clings, whispers. The first thing Grace noticed was the silence. Not the usual kind, not the kind born from an empty room, but the kind that follows absence. The living room felt hollow, sound echoed differently, the bookshelf was gone. So was the quilted reading chair she'd stitched by hand after chemo. A low-grade panic tick, the base of her throat. "Daniel," she called out, setting her keys down. "Where's the chair?" He appeared from the kitchen, sleeves rolled up like he'd been doing something helpful. "Oh, yeah, I cleared some stuff out this morning. Less clutter, less tripping hazard, safety first." She looked around again. 3 framed photos missing. The Afghan folded wrong. "That chair was bolted to the floor in memory," she said quietly. Daniel chuckled. "Mom, it was falling apart." She didn't answer. She sat down on the edge of the couch, at least the couch was still there, and stared at the now empty corner like she could will the armchair back into existence. Later that afternoon, he returned with mail. 2 bank envelopes opened, 1 credit card sliced clean through. "You don't need all these accounts," he said, too brightly. "I've set up a consolidated trust, much simpler. 1 debit card, fewer passwords. You'll thank me." Grace blinked. "I liked the blue card." Daniel waved a hand. "Too high a rate. I'm optimizing." She nodded slowly. "Of course, optimizing." She let the phrase sit like dust on her tongue. That night, Joan knocked on the back door. Joan never knocked. For 30 years, she came through the kitchen without pretense. "I saw a guy take the bookcase out," she whispered. "Was that your idea?" Grace stared at the kettle, waiting for it to whistle. "Apparently, clutter is dangerous now." Joan frowned. "That chair kept your back straight." Grace didn't flinch. "I think I'm safer when I don't argue." Joan pulled something from her coat pocket, a used Android phone. Scratched, but working. "This still has that recorder app you taught me to use when Todd was gaslighting me. Want it?" Grace reached for it like a lifeline. The next day, she pretended not to understand the difference between debit and credit as Daniel explained, "The new system." She nodded slowly, asked him to write it down so she could study it when her brain felt sharper. He left the room smug. She flipped open the phone the second he was gone. She whispered into the mic. March 10th. Daniel deleted 2 accounts. I asked no questions. He smiled like it was a game he was winning. By Friday, he was telling neighbors she had bad days. "She's mostly okay," he told the postal carrier. "But sometimes she gets, foggy. I've had to step in with some things." Bless her heart. Grace stood just out of view on the porch, recording everything. The audio caught her own breath as she whispered into the phone, "I remember every word." That weekend, she found her jewelry box missing. He told her he'd moved valuables somewhere safer. "Don't worry, Mom, I've got you covered." She didn't cry. She smiled, asked if he'd label everything for her peace of mind. He said yes. He always said yes. Sunday, she asked Joan to help her test the voice recorder just to be sure. They sat in the garage, backs to the wall, Joan holding the phone up. "Testing, testing," Grace said softly. "This is Grace Hollander. I do not consent to my accounts being altered." Joan looked at her sideways. "You sure you're ready for this?" Grace stared ahead, voice steel behind softness. "He thinks he's building a story. I'm building a record." And then she leaned back and smiled, not the way she used to, but the way someone does when they start sharpening the knife. Portland, Oregon, mid-March, a sharp, clear cold. The kind that makes silence feel surgical. Grace sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of weak chamomile, but she wasn't sipping. She was listening. Earbuds in, screen dimmed. The voice recorder app ticked by seconds. Daniel's voice spilled from the speaker. "Her short-term's shot," he was saying. "She asked me today if she'd eaten lunch, while still holding the empty plate." Click. "She needs support. The bank shouldn't be calling her for anything anymore." Click. "You should have everything routed through me. I'm her POA, and frankly, it's getting worse." Grace paused the recording. Her tea had gone cold. She copied the audio to a flash drive shaped like a cartoon cat, something she'd bought for a grandniece once and never mailed. Fitting. Things never sent. At the library, she wore a baseball cap and Joan's oversized raincoat. It hung like a tarp over her frame. The printer whirred out statements Daniel had assumed were gone. Joint accounts, closed without consent. Wire transfers, notes flagged urgent from his financial advisor. She signed the computer in under Joan's name. Not paranoia. Caution. Back home, she tucked the stack beneath the loose floorboard in the closet. Right next to her birth certificate and the emergency envelope labeled, "If found, delivered to Sadie, future." Her old attorney had gone and moved to Arizona. Something about sunshine and lower taxes. The new one had an office above a real estate agency and wouldn't take her calls, so she started hunting discreetly. Joan had a niece in law school. Grace made a note. Daniel knocked on the door later that week with two things: a plastic container of lukewarm lasagna and a set of car title transfer papers. "This is just to get things aligned in case anything happens," he said, tone light. "We don't want the DMV hassling you later, right?" She blinked, mouth parted like a broken hinge. "Car title? It's just a formality. You'll still use it, obviously." She squinted. Can I sign it in blue ink? I always liked blue." Daniel hesitated. "Sure. Whatever makes it easier." She fumbled the pen on purpose, signed in the wrong place, apologized, tried again, stared at her own name like it might walk off the page. After he left, she didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, arms folded over her chest, as if lying still would keep the house from slipping away inch by inch. The next morning, she followed a hunch. Daniel's stories didn't match. Some of her things had gone to storage, others had been donated, depending on which neighbor he was charming. But he was never consistent. He didn't think she'd notice. Grace remembered a forgotten utility bill from years ago, one that mentioned a unit he'd rented briefly after college. She looked it up. The storage facility still existed. She called and inquired, claimed she'd lost the key to her unit, gave his birth date. "For recovery," she said with syrupy apology. The young woman on the line paused, then offered to meet her with ID. 2 days later, Grace stood in front of Unit 217. The manager unlocked it. Inside, her missing bookshelf, the Afghan, her wedding photo album, the handmade quilt, her jewelry box unopened. Grace stood in the doorway, arms at her sides. "This isn't clutter," she said softly. "This is my life." She didn't touch anything. Just pulled out the recorder, whispered the date and unit number, and snapped photos from 4 angles. Outside, the air was crisp. Birds chirped like they didn't know betrayal could sound like a child's voice. She texted Joan. Found it. Everything. No reply. But she saw the typing bubbles flash. Back home, Daniel was in the kitchen, smiling. "Guess what? I scheduled your DMV visit next week. We'll have the new title sorted soon." Grace raised an eyebrow. "Oh, good. I forget sometimes." He nodded, smug. Grace walked to the sink and stared out the window, her face unreadable. She whispered, low and sure, "I remember more than you want me to." He didn't hear her, but the recorder in her cardigan pocket did. Portland, Oregon. Late March. The clouds hung low, like someone had pulled a dirty sheet across the sky. Grace opened the door to find a stranger on her porch. Buttoned windbreaker, clipboard, warm enough smile. Government-issued compassion. "Hi there," the woman said. "I'm Tanya, just doing a standard elder wellness visit." Grace blinked. "Elder? Your son contacted our office, said there've been some incidents, memory-related." Grace stepped aside slowly. "Come in. But I warn you, the only danger in this house is expired tea." Inside, Tanya made notes with cheerful efficiency. "Any falls recently?" "No." "Confusion? Wandering?" "Only when I try to understand Twitter." Tanya chuckled. Grace watched her. Watched the way her eyes skimmed surfaces, stove knobs, rugs, loose cords. She wasn't a villain, just trained to look for chaos, not design. Before she left, Tanya offered a laminated pamphlet, What to Expect When Memory Changes. Grace accepted it, tucked it into a drawer she'd already labeled propaganda. When Daniel dropped by that evening, he didn't mention the visit, but he looked pleased. Grace made tea, quietly added a post-it to the inside of the cabinet, March 24th. Tanya, from APS, scheduled by Daniel. Time, 3:15 p.m. She started building the paper trail. Doctor's appointments were logged in a new planner, dates, times, questions she'd asked, names she'd remembered without prompts. Each page initialed by Joan, who arrived daily now under the guise of lunch chats. Together, they organized a binder labeled Medical Truth. Joan printed receipts from Grace's prescriptions, charted her blood pressure, and witnessed her doing daily crossword puzzles. Grace called it her proof of mind. Joan called it ammo. It wasn't long before she heard about Sadie. Joan's niece had passed the bar last year and already developed a reputation for slicing through bureaucracy like butter. Grace requested a meeting, not at her house, but at the coffee shop near the old library, the one with the drafty windows and antique globe in the corner. Sadie arrived wearing boots that thudded and a coat that swished like authority. She ordered black coffee, no cream, no sugar, sat down, opened a yellow notepad. "You're Grace," she said. Not a question. Grace nodded. "Tell me what he's done." Grace didn't dramatize. She didn't cry. She listed, methodically, calmly, clearly. When she finished, Sadie tapped the pen once, then looked up. "I believe you," she said. "More importantly, I know exactly what to do." Grace exhaled. The relief was cold and sharp, like inhaling winter air. Sadie laid out a strategy: evidence chains, testimonial affidavits, contested POA. She'd seen these cases before. "But never this elegant," she said, nodding to the binder Grace had brought. That night, Grace placed a fresh notebook on her nightstand. On the inside cover, she wrote, "Grace Hollander, daily mental clarity, log witnessed by Joan L. McKinney, neighbor, retired schoolteacher." She made an entry, March 25th, did word game, recalled all 3 grocery items, recognized Rachel Maddow, still know all 4 digits of Daniel's social security. The next day, Daniel arrived with a clipboard of his own. "This is Mary Beth," he said, stepping aside to reveal a petite woman with a nurse's badge and a well-practiced expression. "She's going to help out a bit. Just keep an eye on things. Light duties." Grace smiled, tilted her head. "Like a sitter?" she asked. "Like a care companion," Daniel corrected. Mary Beth walked the perimeter of the living room slowly, eyes scanning, hands folded. Later that afternoon, when Daniel had gone to run errands, Grace offered Mary Beth a cup of coffee. "I already made one," Grace said. "Black, no cream, like your file said." Mary Beth raised an eyebrow. "You read my intake file?" Grace smiled. "You were late. I had time." Mary Beth hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "I'm not supposed to say this," she whispered, "but he requested daily logs on your confusion points. That's not normal for care support." Grace didn't flinch. "Did he mention I knit? Because I'm going to need some yarn." Mary Beth tilted her head. "Why?" "To stitch the curtain he's pulling shut." The aide didn't laugh, but she didn't argue either. That night, Grace logged everything. Her tea steeped beside the notebook. The recording app blinked. The porch light stayed on longer than usual. Outside, Daniel's car passed by slowly. Inside, Grace picked up her pen, steady as ever, and wrote, "He's watching. But so am I." She underlined it once. Then closed the book. Multnomah County Courthouse. First week of April. Rain streaked the tall glass like a lie unraveling down the face of truth. Sadie arrived with a briefcase, not a binder. Her heels struck the linoleum like punctuation. Grace followed behind, coat pressed, hair set, silence armored. They passed Daniel in the hall. He wore a tailored navy suit, one shade too smug. He nodded once, like a man greeting a verdict he thought he'd already purchased. Inside, the probate chamber was sterile, a theater lit with fluorescents instead of footlights. A few observers in the gallery. One journalist from the Portland Sentinel, a clerk tapping her pen. The judge, Honorable Althea Morales, adjusted her glasses and opened the session. Docket number 19 P722, in re guardianship of Grace Hollander. Grace sat calmly beside Sadie. Daniel perched at the opposite table, flanked by a doughy, underprepared attorney who kept wiping his glasses with the same napkin he sneezed into. Sadie rose first. "Your Honor," she said, voice low and razor-thin. Before we address the proposed guardianship, the petitioner's capacity must be evaluated objectively, not through hearsay, not through family mythology, through truth. She slid an envelope across the table. We subpoenaed the petitioner's emails and financial correspondence. Exhibit A. Judge Morales opened the folder slowly. Her brows lifted. Sadie continued, walking as she spoke. The emails between Mr. Daniel Hollander and Mr. Victor Kellner, financial advisor, formerly employed at Wakefield and Sons, show coordination of a fraudulent narrative. Click, click. A screen lit up behind her. Highlighted lines flickered. Push the dementia angle harder. She won't resist if she thinks it's her idea. Start with small memory slips. Move furniture, confuse routines. Standard stuff. The courtroom went still. Daniel's lawyer fumbled to object, something about context and misunderstanding, but the judge raised one hand and said, "I've read enough." Daniel stared straight ahead, face blank, except for a twitch in his jaw. Sadie stepped back. "Now, if your honor permits, my client has undergone a second independent cognitive evaluation. The court physician was called. Crisp, objective, clinical. Ms. Hollander shows no signs of dementia, early or otherwise," he said, flipping through pages. "Her memory scores rank in the 92nd percentile for her age. Frankly, I've tested 40-year-olds with worse recall." "Did she seem confused during the evaluation?" "She corrected my math twice." A few muffled laughs rippled through the gallery. The judge turned to Grace. "Ms. Hollander, do you wish to speak?" Grace rose slowly. No notes, no hand tremble, just a soft, firm inhale. "I've lived in the same home for 40 years. I've paid every tax, remembered every birthday, and buried a husband before I could legally drink wine. I've survived chemo, foreclosure threats, and now this." Her eyes met Daniel's. "I may be old, but I am not erased." She stepped back, sat down, adjusted her sleeve. The room exhaled. Judge Morales cleared her throat. "I am issuing an immediate freeze on the power of attorney transfer and all estate reallocations. A 30-day independent investigation will commence. If I find further evidence of coercion or financial misconduct, formal charges may follow." Daniel's jaw dropped. "But she asked me to help. She signed the forms." The judge tilted her head. "No, Mr. Hollander, she survived them." Bang of the gavel. Motion granted. Court adjourned. Outside in the hallway, Daniel reached for Grace's elbow. Instinct or habit. She stepped back without looking. "You played a long game," he said, voice low. She adjusted her scarf. "And I remember every rule." He blinked, but she was already walking away. Sadie caught up beside her. "That crack in his face when the judge read the emails? Frameworthy." Grace didn't smile. "That wasn't a crack. That was the start of a collapse." They reached the elevator. Grace pressed the button. Ding. Behind them, Daniel turned toward the reporter still scribbling notes. Grace turned too, just enough to see him. And then she said quietly, "Tell them the curtain's lifting. And I'm the one holding the rope." The elevator doors opened. She stepped in. Never looked back. Portland, Oregon, mid-April. The lilacs were blooming, but the air still felt like winter wasn't ready to leave. The police station smelled like printer toner and resignation. Grace sat stiff-backed in the vinyl chair, a folder resting in her lap. Joan sat beside her, arms folded, the kind of woman who didn't fidget even when justice ran late. The officer behind the desk glanced through the paperwork, brow tightening with each page. "This is substantial," he murmured. Joan spoke up. "And there's more where that came from. I've seen him come and go. I've heard him raise his voice. Once I caught him yanking her mailbox open like it owed him money." Grace said nothing, just pushed the flash drive across the desk. "He lied to banks, falsified my doctor's notes. This is audio," she said. "And emails." The officer nodded. "We'll log this. You've officially filed a report for suspected financial elder abuse." Grace stood. "It's not suspected. It's happening." That night, Daniel didn't come by. He texted instead, "Just giving you space after all the stress." "You doing okay, Mom?" She didn't answer. just screenshot the message and log the time in her new notebook. Daniel attempting distance after legal pressure. Pattern, retreat, then reframe. From then on, every interaction was captured. Phone on the table, recorder on her person, mirror above the microwave angled just enough to reflect the front door. Daniel didn't come in anymore. He waited on the porch, smiling too wide, holding grocery bags like offerings. She accepted nothing. She wasn't just documenting now, she was broadcasting limits. Still, some nights, she remembered when she used to pack his lunch at 5 a.m., bologna, mustard, and notes folded into napkins. You're smart. You're strong. You're everything I wasn't allowed to be. But love had been currency, and she'd been robbed. Flashback. Grace, 32, working nights at a bottling plant. Daniel, 14, sleeping in the break room on a blanket behind the vending machines. She'd slipped him her sandwich once, stomach aching through dawn. He wanted out of their tiny apartment so badly. She let him believe college would make him different. She'd skipped meals to send him there, and now he'd tried to erase her. On a Thursday morning, she walked to the library. A man she vaguely remembered, Adam from the community garden, intercepted her outside the door. Quiet, nervous. "I don't want trouble," he said, "but I think you should see this." He handed her an envelope thick and unsealed, inside printouts of loan documents, student loans, all in Grace's name, forged, application dates from 6 years ago, Daniel's enrollment period, her signature, wrong angle on the H, too sharp on the G Adam swallowed. "He asked me to be a co-signer once. I said no. Later I overheard him bragging about faking the rest." Grace blinked slowly. "Why are you giving me this now?" He shrugged. "My mom died of early dementia. Real dementia." "What he's doing?" "I couldn't stay quiet anymore." She nodded, took the envelope, walked home, silent and straight-backed. By evening, Sadie had scanned every page. "These aren't just loans," she said. "They're theft and felony fraud." Grace sipped tea. "Add it to the list." Sadie looked at her carefully. "You ready to revise your estate plan?" Grace stood, walked to the cabinet where the old will lived. She opened the folder, stared at Daniel's name printed so neatly on the beneficiary line, took a pen and slashed a single line through it. "Start fresh," she said. "I'm not handing down silence." That weekend, she met with the estate officer, signed over her primary assets to a trust managed by a nonprofit elder rights group. Joan was named witness and backup executor. The trust had one stipulation: no familial override. As she exited the office, the receptionist handed her an envelope. "Someone dropped this off for you." No return name, just her name, handwritten. Inside, a copy of a childhood drawing, Daniel's, crayon stick figures, one labeled Mom with a yellow crown. The date in the corner read 1986. On the back, scribbled hastily, "I didn't mean for it to go this far." She stared at it, then folded it once, carefully, and dropped it in the shred bin by the door. Her voice, quiet, almost loving. "Then you shouldn't have started." Portland, Oregon. Late April. The wind was no longer biting, just watchful. The living room light clicked on at exactly 6:42 a.m. Grace stood in the doorway, barefoot, holding her phone like a compass. She walked the perimeter of the house, kitchen, hallway, bedroom, closet, snapped one photo per room, angled, clear, no filters, no edits. Each caption she uploaded was simple: lived in, memory intact, home, not a facility. By mid-morning, her online post had gathered quiet traction, neighbors commenting, "She still does the Times crossword faster than I can," and "Grace brought me soup last week when I was sick. Doesn't sound like someone who forgot their own name." At 11 a.m., she met her lawyer outside the Multnomah County Recorder's office. The building was gray, blocky, like something designed to outlive emotion. Sadie handed her a clipboard. "Revocation of joint ownership rights," she said, "filed under Oregon Revised Statute 93.730. This is yours now, solely." Grace didn't hesitate, signed on the line, pen steady. "This house remembers me," she said. "Now it's legal." That night, Joan brought over lasagna. "You got mail?" she added casually, handing over a fat envelope from Grace's home insurance company. Grace opened it. Midway through the letter, her hands stopped moving. Policy reassessment. Notified by her son that the home was currently vacant due to residential care placement. Rate hike. Risk adjustment. Documentation requested. She didn't speak, just turned the paper toward Joan. "Bastard said I was institutionalized," Grace whispered. Joan's hand clenched around her fork. "That's insurance fraud." "No," Grace said. "That's Daniel." She spent the next day walking door to door with a notepad. Neighbors she'd known for decades invited her in, made tea, signed without hesitation. 11 affidavits, each attesting she lived independently, cooked her own meals, took her trash out on schedule, even yelled at the squirrels with perfect clarity. Sadie bundled them into a packet and smiled. "This isn't just character support, it's evidence. Daniel doesn't realize you're building a trial before the trial." That evening, Grace did one final walk-through. She placed a rose in a chipped vase by the window, opened her curtains wide, lit a candle in the kitchen, sat at the dining table and posed, just for a moment, looking directly at the camera. Caption, "No one institutionalized here, just a woman with receipts." The post went quiet for hours. Then, a knock. Daniel. Suit jacket too crisp, smile twitching at the edges. He didn't wait for an invitation, just stepped into the doorway like he'd paid rent on her air. "Can we talk?" he said. Grace didn't answer, just stared, cold, polite. "I get it. You're upset. But this whole public crusade thing, you're making it ugly." Grace stepped forward. She was smaller than him, thinner now. But when she looked up, the room shrank around him. "You haven't even seen ugly yet," she said. Daniel's smile vanished. "You're not thinking clearly," he snapped. This obsession, it's damaging. It's not just you anymore. People are asking questions. I could lose everything." "Good," she said. "That means I'm close." He started to speak again, but the recorder on her side table blinked to life. A soft beep. A signal. She tilted her head toward it. "I'm preserving clarity," she said. "I don't rely on memory anymore. I back it up." He turned. The door was still open. A neighbor across the street stood watering her flowers, watching. He muttered something that wasn't quite a goodbye and stalked off. Grace closed the door softly behind him. In the silence, the house felt warmer, like it was on her side now. She walked back to her chair, logged the time, wrote April 29th. Daniel confronted, attempted intimidation, recorded, witnessed. She reached for the remote, paused. There, tucked in the cushion crease, her old blue debit card, the one he'd told her had been shut down. She stared at it, then lifted it gently, ran a fingertip across the numbers, number not shut down, just hidden. She stood, grabbed her coat, and whispered to the room, time to see what else he buried. Portland, Oregon, early May. Spring, finally serious about staying, but in Courtroom 4A, the air was still winter. Grace Hollander sat in the petitioner's chair with her spine so straight it looked carved. Her gray blouse was neatly pressed, a thin chain at her throat, a binder balanced perfectly across her lap. Next to her, Sadie clicked her pen once, then stopped. Everything was ready. Across the room, Daniel's attorney, Carl Nesbitt, cleared his throat and stood with the solemnity of someone trying to sell humility as strategy. "Your Honor, my client is not here out of greed but concern," he began. "Mr. Hollander is simply trying to ensure his mother's safety. He's observed increased confusion, misplaced items, unusual behavior, classic markers of cognitive decline. This petition is not about control, it's about compassion." Daniel nodded slowly, hands folded like prayer. His suit today was charcoal. His expression, wounded son at the end of his rope. Grace didn't blink. Judge Morales looked up from her notes. "Ms. Hollander, do you wish to respond?" Sadie rose before Grace could move. "We do. And we'll start with the facts." She placed a thick folder on the evidence table. Inside, logs, entries, signed affidavits, bank statements, timestamps, photos, videos, and a color-coded spreadsheet labeled False Claim Index. "Your Honor," Sadie said, voice dry as paper. Ms. Hollander has spent the last 3 months meticulously documenting her capacity, tracking every accusation with counterproof. What Mr. Hollander presented as mental fog was in fact strategy and surveillance. She turned toward the screen behind her. The first video played. Grace at her dining table, stating the date, time, and naming 6 current events, 3 medications, and the full names of her high school teachers. Another clip. Grace solving a crossword in under 5 minutes. A shot of her walking unaided through the grocery store. Timestamp, last Tuesday. The courtroom was quiet except for the rustle of notepads. Then came the journals, photocopied, signed daily by Joan, backed with prescriptions, receipts, and handwriting samples. 1 page from each week was enlarged for display, each more coherent than the last. Sadie turned to the gallery. "We'd like to call Dr. Moira Lynn, cognitive neurologist, as our expert witness." Dr. Lynn took the stand, early 40s, clear eyes, clipped tone. "I administered a comprehensive cognitive evaluation," she said. "Ms. Hollander scored in the 95th percentile across all key metrics: recall, pattern recognition, abstract reasoning. Did you notice any signs of memory disruption?" "Only that she remembered the date of my birthday, which I did not share." A soft laugh flickered through the room. Carl Nesbitt stood. "Dr. Lynn, isn't it true that cognitive tests can be manipulated, that someone can practice?" "They can," she said, "but you cannot fake clarity of insight, and you certainly can't fabricate self-awareness at this level of detail over multiple weeks." Grace sat motionless. Carl tried one more angle. "Wouldn't it be possible that Ms. Hollander is simply having a good spell?" Sadie didn't object. She didn't need to. Dr. Lynn smiled slightly. "If this is a good spell, I'd like to prescribe it to half my patients." The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Hollander," she said, "would you like to add anything?" Daniel stood, then hesitated. Sweat glistened at his collar. "I just wanted to help," he murmured. "She asked me to take over things. She was scared. She cried. She didn't remember where she was." Grace's eyes narrowed. Sadie stood again, calm. "We request to enter audio recordings from March 18th, March 25th, and April 2nd into the record, each containing instances of Mr. Hollander discussing strategy with his financial advisor about inducing confusion through environmental manipulation." The recordings played. Daniel's voice, smug and sharp. "She thinks she forgot it herself. Perfect. Slip the new pill in at night, she won't notice." Judge Morales closed the folder. "I will render a formal decision within 7 days. Until then, the guardianship petition is on hold, and Mr. Hollander is not to engage in financial or medical matters regarding his mother." Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Court adjourned. Outside, Grace stood by the fountain, back straight, watching the sky soften. Sadie leaned beside. Her, "You nailed him to the wall." Grace didn't respond. She was staring across the street. Daniel, on the phone, pacing, face red, gesturing wildly, panicked, a predator without his leash. She smiled to herself, then whispered to Sadie, "He's running out of lies." And behind her, tucked inside her coat pocket, her recorder blinked to life again. Portland, Oregon, mid-May. The rhododendrons had bloomed too quickly, their petals already falling like things not meant to last. Grace sat on the edge of her bed, clutching an old cassette recorder the size of a brick. She hadn't touched it in over a decade. It had sat in the back of her closet, tangled in a nest of charger cords and expired batteries. But when she popped in the tape labeled Mitch, August '94, the voice that filled the room made her heart stagger. "Grace," her late husband said, static curling his vowels. "If you're hearing this, it means you're still standing. That's enough. You were always better at starting over than I was. Just don't let anyone tell you who you are." She didn't cry, just rewound the tape, played it again, and this time she let herself sit back. Later that afternoon, she called a rideshare under a false name and had it drop her 3 blocks from her destination. Daniel's ex-wife lived in a narrow duplex near the Selwood Bridge. Emily. Small voice. Sharp eyes, a woman who used to bake her birthday cookies even after the divorce. Emily opened the door without a smile, but didn't close it. Grace cut straight to it. "Did he isolate you too?" Emily stepped back. "Come in." The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon. They sat. "He told me I was overreacting," Emily said. "When I questioned his passwords, when I found his second phone, he used to hide things in plain sight, write them down and dare me to question it." Grace nodded slowly. "He's been hiding my life, piece by piece." Emily poured tea. "I loved him once, but he only loved the version of me that stayed small." Before leaving, Grace asked one more question. "Did he ever use your name financially?" Emily hesitated. "Not mine. But he asked me once if I'd be willing to open a line in your name. Said you were too old to care about credit scores." "I thought it was a joke." Grace didn't laugh. "He wasn't joking." Back home, Grace pulled out the flash drive and went digging again. She traced every email thread she'd intercepted. One detail stuck out. A routing number she hadn't noticed before, linked to an unfamiliar subaccount labeled Memory Holding/DH. The next morning, she called the bank. Claimed she was updating records. The woman on the phone hesitated. "Are you referring to the fiduciary trust initiated 6 months ago under power of attorney?" Grace's voice didn't shake. "Yes, that's the one." She listened as the rep confirmed, $80,000 withdrawn across 4 months. Allocation, investment holdings, private tuition reimbursement, and offshore protection insurance. Grace's breath caught. Tuition? For whom? She thanked the woman, hung up, and wrote one word across her notepad in block letters: theft. Sadie met her that evening at the house. Grace handed her the documentation, annotated with dates, account trails, and flagged items. Sadie's jaw tightened. "This isn't guardianship abuse. This is criminal fraud. We can file for emergency litigation, asset freeze, and civil penalties." Grace tilted her head. "Do it." Sadie stood. "We'll have to act fast. If he's shifting anything else." Grace held up the old cassette recorder. "He started shifting the minute Mitch died. I just didn't know what to call it yet." As Sadie left, Grace sat down at the desk in her sunroom. The light had softened. A long, golden streak cut across the hardwood floor. She opened her laptop, clicked into a blank document labeled Affidavit, Grace Hollander, Truths I Wasn't Supposed to Know. She typed, "He told them I was gone, but he was the one who disappeared first. Behind the mask, behind the spreadsheets, behind a boy I raised, and a man I no longer recognized." Just then, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You're making a mistake. Don't burn what's left." No name. She stared at it, then typed one last line in the affidavit. "I'm not burning anything. I'm documenting the fire he lit." She clicked save, and under her breath whispered, "Let it burn." Portland, Oregon, mid-May. The sun came late and mean, as if it regretted showing up at all. Grace woke to a fog in her chest. Not sleepiness, not grief. Something heavier. Her hands felt too light. Her tongue was a second too slow. The cup on her nightstand was still half full, chamomile, same as always. Daniel had made it the night before. She hadn't seen him come in, just heard his voice near the kettle. "You looked tired. I thought you might need help falling asleep." He was gone before morning. By noon, Joan noticed her slurring. "Are you drunk?" Joan asked, half joking, half panicked. Grace tried to answer. The words didn't move. "Right." Joan grabbed her purse. At the ER, Grace lay under fluorescent lights while monitors beeped like insults. Her blood work came back fast. The doctor, a young woman with tired eyes and tattooed knuckles, pulled Joan into the hallway. "Low levels of benzodiazepines," she said. "Nothing she's prescribed. It's trace, but enough to cause fatigue, disorientation, confusion in someone her age." Joan blinked. "Are you saying she was drugged?" The doctor nodded slowly. "And not accidentally." When Sadie arrived, her coat was still half-buttoned, laptop bag swinging at her hip. She didn't speak, just stood beside Grace's bed, took her hand gently, and said, "I'm calling the detective assigned to the financial case. We're filing new charges." Grace tried to nod. Her head felt thick, but her eyes were steady, focused. Furious, Sadie pressed a cold cloth to her wrist. You were right to record everything, even his silence. By the next morning, the case file had grown a new section header: Suspected intentional poisoning. The police took her tea mug into evidence. They photographed every bottle in her cabinet. Joan handed over the list of everyone who'd entered the house since April. Only one name was repeated: Daniel Hollander. Grace was placed under 24/7 community watch, half volunteer, half police rotation. She didn't argue. She simply made a fresh pot of coffee. Black. No sugar, no mystery. Neighbors took shifts. Joan slept in the guest room. Adam from the garden brought over his German shepherd to guard the porch. Even Mary Beth, the nurse Daniel had hired and who'd since quit, returned to sit quietly by the front door. Sadie handled the court filing. Emergency injunction, expansion of charges to include elder endangerment, intent to harm, and attempted poisoning. If we're lucky, they'll freeze his passport. Grace said nothing. Just open the window. The house needed fresh air. 3 days later, Daniel didn't show up to his next court-ordered check-in. The clerk called twice. No answer. Sadie tried. No answer. The detective tried. Straight to voicemail. By day 4, he was officially listed as a fugitive under investigation. Grace read the report on her front porch, lips tight, breath calm. Then she folded the paper and tucked it under her mug. He's not gone, she said softly. Joan glanced up. How do you know? Because men like him never run without a plan. He's not afraid of justice. He's afraid of exposure. That night, Grace sat by the window with the recorder in her lap. She hit record and whispered, May 19th, hospital confirmed sedatives. Police involved, Daniel missing, but I am not. She leaned back, listened to the hum of the fridge, the bark of a dog down the street. Then her landline rang. She let it ring twice before answering. Silence. Then a voice, warped by distance or intent. I didn't mean for you to end up in a hospital. She recognized it. Daniel. Don't do this, he added. Please, let's stop here. I'll disappear. No more lies, no more damage. She didn't speak, didn't hang up, just slowly reached toward the recorder and pressed stop. Then whispered, You already disappeared, Daniel. I'm just collecting the receipts. Portland, Oregon, late May. The sun had finally committed to being warm, but Grace wore her coat anyway. The courthouse air still bit at the skin. The assessment was held in a state-certified facility on the east side. White walls, glass doors, nothing to hide and nowhere to rest. The room was spare. 2 chairs, 1 desk, a single sheet of paper with a set of numbers and a small stack of blank cards. Dr. Avril Singh, appointed by the state, tapped her pen lightly. Ms. Hollander, we'll begin now. No devices, no support, just you. Grace nodded once. Just me. It started with sequences, numbers, colors, reversed patterns, then logic tests followed by recall. She was asked to retell stories, identify contradictions, even interpret abstract metaphors. Grace answered every question with clipped clarity. Her hands didn't shake, her voice didn't wobble. She corrected a typo in one prompt. By the end, doctor. Singh lowered her pen. I've never had a patient request harder questions halfway through, she said. Grace just smiled. I'm very tired of being underestimated. Back at the courthouse that afternoon, the hearing began without Daniel. Again. His seat sat empty. Gray folder unopened beside it. The bailiff gave the judge a subtle shake of the head. No call. No show. Judge Morales sighed, sharp and deliberate. Let the record reflect that Daniel Hollander has violated terms of his release and failed to appear for a 3rd mandatory hearing. Effective immediately, a bench warrant is issued for arrest on charges of financial fraud, elder abuse, and attempted poisoning. There was no dramatic gasp, just the heavy rhythm of justice moving forward. Sadie rose. We now formally request full legal restoration of Ms. Hollander's independent status, medical, financial, and custodial. As per state ruling guidelines, we've submitted updated evaluations, affidavits, and verified documentation. Judge Morales reviewed the file silently for a long moment. Then, petition granted. All prior powers of attorney are void. Ms. Hollander's rights are reinstated in full, retroactive to February 10th. Grace closed her eyes, not because she doubted the outcome, but because that was the date Daniel first called her confused. Outside, cameras waited. Not many, just a local CBS affiliate, a blog journalist, and a student from Portland State working on a project titled Modern Matriarchs: Resilience in the Face of Control. Grace stepped out beside Sadie, who gave a subtle nod. One mic was extended. "Ms. Hollander," a reporter said, "how does it feel to win this case?" Grace didn't smile. This wasn't a case. It was a reclamation. "Do you have a message for others going through similar family conflicts?" She turned, looked straight into the lens. "If someone tells you you're losing your mind, check the locks on your accounts. If they say you're confused, write everything down. And if they try to erase you, remind them that memory has teeth." The story aired that night. By morning, her phone buzzed with messages: former colleagues, distant relatives, strangers from 3 time zones away. One text, unsigned: "My mother went through the same thing. She didn't survive it. You did. Thank you." Grace stared at it longer than the others. A week later, she stood at the front of a packed auditorium. The Oregon Elder Justice Initiative had invited her to open their spring summit. A small plaque sat on the podium: Grace Hollander, survivor, advocate, record keeper. She didn't bring notes, didn't need to. Instead, she held up a small flash drive, the same one shaped like a cartoon cat. A murmur ran through the crowd. "This," she said, "is how I saved myself." Not in fire, in files, not with yelling, with timestamps. Don't underestimate silence. It has teeth, too. Applause. Sadie clapped from the front row. Joan dabbed her eyes with a tissue embroidered with daisies. That night, back at home, Grace poured herself a glass of iced tea and watched the sun bleed gold over the porch railing. Then her phone buzzed. Voicemail. Blocked number. She hesitated, then hit play. The voice was low, breathless. "You may have won the court, Mom, but you don't know everything. You never did." She listened twice, then opened her notebook and wrote, "May 31st. Daniel's voice, still hiding, still wrong." Then added just beneath it, "Let him run. I'm still building the map," and closed the book. Portland, Oregon, early June. The scent of summer was just beginning to hum in the air. Cut grass, warm brick, something hopeful trying to push through. Grace sat at the table by the window, a pen in one hand and a document in front of her that made no room for mercy. It was her new will. No lawyers speaking in circles, no soft disclaimers, just Sadie sitting across from her with a single line drawn in bold across the top: "Beneficiaries, updated and final." Grace had crossed Daniel's name out in thick, deliberate ink, not just a line through it, a full black box. His name vanished like a lie retracted too late. "This feels," she said slowly, "like a second kind of survival." Sadie nodded. "It is." She left everything to 3 entities: Joan, the woman who never asked for thanks; the Elder Justice Trust, who fought for people whose families forgot how to love them; and the neighborhood grant fund Grace was starting herself, designed to help low-income seniors pay for legal support before it was too late. "Call it the Quiet Record," Grace said, "named after what saved me." Sadie smiled. "That's beautiful." She signed the document slowly, hand steady, initials in all the right corners. When the ink dried, she reached into the drawer beside her, pulled out her old will, the one Daniel's name sat on like a crown. She sliced his name out with scissors. Just the name, nothing else. Then she framed the rest of the page, the signature line still intact, the date still legible, and the glaring, perfect hole where his name used to live. She hung it in the hallway, above the thermostat. Joan came by that evening with soup. "What's that?" she asked, nodding toward the frame. Grace stirred her spoon and answered without looking up. "Proof of growth." The next morning, a local station aired a segment titled "Justice for Grace," the Portland case that changed probate power. Her photo filled the screen, her words subtitled across the bottom: "If they try to erase you, become unerasable." The phone didn't stop ringing. Letters arrived, some handwritten, some typed, one from a girl in Utah who signed it, "Thanks for showing me that women like us don't have to go quietly." On Wednesday, Sadie brought a bottle of cider. "To signings," she said. "To endings," Grace corrected. "And better beginnings." They toasted on the porch, the bottle sweating between them. Just as dusk fell, Grace's phone buzzed. A court announcement. Daniel Hollander, trial set for July 17th, Multnomah County Courthouse, fraud, abuse, and 3 counts of attempted endangerment. It was public now. The news spread fast. A neighbor came by to drop off zucchini bread, whispering, "Saw it online." "We're rooting for you." Grace nodded once. It's not about rooting anymore. It's about record. That night, Grace took the framed page down for a moment. She slipped the square of paper with Daniel's name, the one she had cut out, into a box, a fireproof one, labeled it unclaimed, and then she sat back down at her desk, opened a new tab on her laptop, typed Quiet Record Legal Grant Application, Pilot Phase Eligibility, Oregon residents aged 65 plus requirement, suspicion of legal or financial control without consent. Promise, we believe you before anyone else does. Just as she clicked save, her phone pinged. A new voicemail. No words this time. Just breathe. Tired. Fast. Then, click. Disconnected. She didn't play it twice. Instead, she opened her recorder and said, June 8th. Newell signed. Name removed. Trust protected. Community engaged. Daniel's voice is now background noise. She hit stop. Then stood, turned off the light, and let the house sit with her silence. Not emptiness, not fear, just clarity, framed in every room. Portland, Oregon, July 17th. A heatwave clung to the city like a dare. Outside the Multnomah County Courthouse, the air shimmered. Inside, the temperature was set to 68 degrees, but no one felt cool. The courtroom buzzed, whispers, heels on tile, cameras flashing before being ushered out. The gallery was full. Grace entered in navy, clean lines, no ornamentation, her hair pinned back. She moved slowly, deliberately, not out of weakness but control. Joan walked beside her. Sadie followed with a portfolio hugged tight to her chest like a blade she meant to draw at the right moment. Daniel was already seated at the defendant's table. He looked thinner, suit less crisp. A bead of sweat crawled down his neck. His attorney, a lean man with practiced neutrality, barely glanced at Grace. Judge Morales took her seat. State of Oregon versus Daniel Hollander. Charges: financial elder fraud, medical coercion, attempted poisoning. Daniel's lawyer opened with a sigh dressed as compassion. There was no malice. My client misunderstood boundaries while trying to protect his aging mother. His actions were misguided, not malicious. He glanced at the jury. Grace didn't flinch. Sadie stood. Let's call it what it was, not a misunderstanding. A strategy she called Grace first. Grace walked to the stand, swore in, and faced 12 strangers like they were the last lock she had to pick. Sadie's voice was soft. Ms. Hollander, can you walk us through the first time you felt your autonomy being stripped? Grace answered without pause. February 10th. He brought me lasagna and papers. Said they were for car insurance. They weren't. Sadie nodded. And what followed? Grace opened the binder. One section at a time. Screenshots of bank accounts opened without her consent. Transactions she never approved. Emails Daniel sent using her name. Is this your signature? Sadie asked, pointing. No, Grace replied. It's a forgery. My loop in the H doesn't curl that way. They played the recordings next. Daniel's voice casual and damning. She won't question it. She's too tired lately. Slip the new pill in at night. One juror shifted uncomfortably. When Daniel was called to testify, he tried charm first. I just wanted to help, he said, voice trembling. She was forgetting things. She'd call me twice in the same day and ask the same question. Sadie interrupted. And yet, she remembered your social security number, Daniel, on March 12th, while testifying under oath. Do you recall that? Daniel stammered. She must have written it down. Sadie slid the journal forward. Daily entries, cross-verified, time-stamped. Tell me, how does a confused woman run legal documentation better than your firm's assistant? he fumbled. "I didn't mean to—" "You meant to benefit," Sadie snapped. "You meant to silence." The gallery murmured. The judge called for order. Later, Dr. Lin returned to the stand. Calm, clipped. She showed no signs of decline, but her environment showed manipulation. The final moment came when Sadie held up Grace's framed will, the one with Daniel's name removed. "Tell me," she asked, her voice steady, "if this were your mother, would you want this to be her legacy?" Daniel didn't answer. He looked down. He didn't look up again. The jury deliberated for under 3 hours. They returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts. Judge Morales delivered the sentence the next day. Restitution totaling $82,400, 5 years of supervised probation, no contact with Ms. Hollander unless initiated and documented through a legal intermediary. Daniel blinked. No outburst, just silence. Finally earned. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Grace stepped into the sunlight, Sadie behind her, Joan beside. As she descended the courthouse steps, the crowd applauded. No confetti, no flashbulbs, just clapping, solid, human, unscripted. Someone shouted, "We see you, Grace!" She lifted a hand, not to wave, to signal something final. That night, back at home, she poured a glass of water, pulled out her recorder and said, "July 18th, the curtain closed." But I stayed standing, still remembering, still me. Then she turned off the recorder, and for the first time in months, she slept with the door open. Portland, Oregon, late July. The fire season came early, skies ambered by smoke, heat rolled through the valley like warning. Grace sat in the reading nook, the only room with no electronics. Just a rotary fan in the window and a small pile of letters on her lap. One envelope stood out, thick, expensive, embossed with gold leaf, from a New York publishing house. She opened it, read twice, then once more, aloud, "We would be honored to offer you a memoir contract." Working title? The Memory They Feared, advance attached. She didn't smile, just reached for her tea, blew across the surface and whispered, "They should have feared it." 3 weeks later, Powell's books in downtown Portland filled to the walls, folding chairs packed, windows fogged with breath. Grace stood at the front wearing soft gray, the color of storms long past. Her voice cut clean through the hum. "They said I was forgetting. I was not. I remembered everything, just waited for the world to catch up." Applause. Then stillness again, like everyone in the room leaned forward in the same breath. She read from the prologue. "When they tried to erase me, I wrote in ink. When they blurred the truth, I filed the footage. When they lied, I time-stamped it." Afterward, the line stretched past the coffee bar, people holding books. Some held folded letters, others just held silence, needing no words. Near the end of the line stood a girl in a denim jacket, no older than 20, quiet, nervous. When it was her turn, she didn't hand over a book, just said, "I'm Dana, Daniel's daughter." Grace looked up. The girl's eyes were familiar, except softer, unsure. "I'm sorry," Dana said, "for all of it. He told me you weren't well, that you wanted to forget. I didn't question it. I wish I had." Grace took her hand gently. "Now you know what questions are worth." Dana nodded. "I want to do better." "You already are," Grace replied. She watched her walk away, one burden lighter. That night, Grace lit a fire in her backyard pit. The evening was dry, still. Joan stood nearby, holding 2 mugs of cider, one for sipping, one for toasting. Grace knelt slowly and opened a manila folder. Inside, the forged version of her will. Daniel's handiwork, fabricated initials, clipped language, dates that didn't align. She fed it into the flame, page by page, watched the lies curl, crack, and crumble. Joan clinked her mug against Grace's. "To ashes." Grace lifted hers in return. "To memory." The next morning, she met with Sadie at the bank. They signed the founding documents for the Mitch Hollander Scholarship Fund, designed for students raised by single parents, those who skipped meals to make futures possible. "Your husband would be proud," Sadie said. Grace tapped the final signature. "He already was. He just didn't live long enough to see how far I'd go." The scholarship announcement went public that evening. Grace didn't attend the press event. Instead, she returned to her sunroom, opened a fresh notebook labeled Next. Inside, she wrote the first line. "I remember everything they tried to take from me, and now I choose what stays." She paused, then walked to the mantel where her recorder still lived. She pressed it once, just once, and said, "July 29th, legacy reclaimed. Lies returned to sender. The book begins now." As she clicked stop, a faint ping echoed from her phone. One new email, no sender listed. Subject, "You win, but you don't know everything." She didn't open it, just deleted it, then backed up her entire hard drive to 3 places and walked outside, barefoot, into the cooling dusk. The stars had started to show themselves, quiet, sharp, permanent. Portland, Oregon, early August. The new house sat at the end of a quiet street lined with maples, their leaves just beginning to flirt with gold. Grace chose it herself. 1 floor, no stairs, with a porch wide enough for silence and 2 chairs. Inside, the walls were soft green. Books lined every shelf. Art, real art, hung in imperfect rows. Watercolors by local hands, oil paintings bought in cafes, a charcoal sketch of a woman standing alone beneath a bridge. Grace unpacked slowly. She brought only what mattered. A ceramic mug with a chip on the rim, a photo of Mitch grinning in flannel, her recorder, and a locked leather journal, spine embossed in gold. Everything I remember. Every night she added 1 entry, not just facts, feelings, textures, sounds, the smell of hospital antiseptic, the scrape of Daniel's voice when he lied, the softness of Dana's apology, memory, preserved on her own terms. She never wrote his name, not anymore. Mid-month, she was told to come to the community center for a routine insurance review. She raised 1 eyebrow, but played along. When she walked in, the lights flicked on. Surprise! Joan was in front, holding a banner that read, "Grace Hollander, 75 and unshakable." Sadie brought a lemon cake with a quote in blue frosting, "If they try to erase you, outright them." There were neighbors, former nurses, bookstore clerks, the barista who once saw her stand firm when Daniel tried to pay for her coffee. Even the mayor's assistant showed up with a citation for advocacy in elder justice and narrative sovereignty. Grace blinked. "That's not a real phrase," she muttered. Sadie grinned. "It is now." Later, as they passed around cider and someone played soft guitar, a girl approached. Maybe 20, maybe less. Her hands trembled as she handed Grace a folded note. "I read your book," she whispered. "I'm going through something. I haven't told anyone yet." Grace looked her in the eyes, calm, knowing, fierce. "Don't let them narrate you," she said. "Write it down, say it aloud, prove it with ink, or timestamps, or memory, but don't let them steal your voice and call it kindness." The girl nodded, lip trembling. Grace hugged her once, short and sure. "Start tonight." That evening, she returned home alone. Joan would come by tomorrow with zucchini soup. Sadie had promised to fix the Wi-Fi, though Grace didn't care whether it worked or not. When she checked her mail, 1 postcard sat waiting. No stamp, no return address, just her name in lowercase letters. The back was blank. She stood in her kitchen, held it to the light, then fed it to the stove flame without reading a word. It curled inward and disappeared. The next morning, Grace sat on her porch with Joan beside her. Both wore sandals. Both had glasses of chilled water sweating in the August sun. Birds made a racket in the trees. Somewhere down the block, a child was learning how to whistle. A wind chime clinked in half notes. Joan nudged her. "You okay?" Grace nodded. "Better than okay." They sat in quiet for a long while, until the breeze shifted and Joan asked softly, "You ever think about him?" Grace didn't answer at first, just looked out at the world. "My mind is sharp," she said at last. "My name is mine." She leaned back in her chair. "And my son?" She smiled. "He's just someone I used to know."